You're listening to episode 331 of The Secular Buddhist. Welcome to The Secular Buddhist. I'm Ted Meissner. The Secular Buddhist is the official podcast of the Secular Buddhist Association, a grassroots-driven effort to answer the needs of secular teaching and practice for contemporary society. The podcast has interviews and roundtable discussions pertaining to engaged Buddhist training and practice, and the SBA website has show notes for each episode along with resource materials. Though the podcast focuses on core practice from a secular viewpoint, more traditional teachings are welcome and openly discussed. Barbara Bonner joins us to speak about inspiring forgiveness. As you may know, this podcast is only able to continue with your support. Please take a moment and visit secularbuddhism.org and click on the contributions button if you want to see these conversations remain available and support the exploration of secular Buddhism. Thank you for your help and for your care and generosity. Forgiveness is a term that can mean different things to different people, whether we're Buddhists or not. From welcome lightening of burdens to harmful judgments about having to practice it. From the guest in today's interview, as we go through this time, and we all, to one extent or another, face our own mortality, forgiveness is the quality that comes up over and over again in working with people on the end of their lives. Those they want to forgive, and those from whom they want to ask forgiveness. The only message in this world around us is, don't wait. After starting her professional life as an art historian, Barbara Bonner has devoted her career to nonprofit management, fundraising, and philanthropy. In New York, she held leadership positions in 3 of the city's distinguished museums. She then served as vice president of Bennington College and of the Kripalu Center for Yoga and Health. Since 2009, she has had her own consulting company that helps nonprofit organizations transform their board leadership and philanthropic support. In addition, Barbara has served on 10 nonprofit boards, most recently as board chair of the Barry Center for Buddhist Studies. Several years ago, she started a major fund for helping women with cancer in her region. After 30 years in New York City, Barbara now lives in a converted barn in the Berkshire Hills of Western Massachusetts. So, sit back, relax, and because I've been watching Picard lately, have a nice Earl Grey, hot. Our guest today is Barbara Bonner. Barbara, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much.
Very glad to have you here, and I'd like to start by just having you talk a bit about your background.
It's not a question we're often asked. I'll try to jump in. Well, it always interests me how people get to a life in Buddhist study and practice. And it's usually such a circuitous route, and all the early years seemingly have nothing to do with that. And then when you have the opportunity to talk about it, you think, oh, there are those things. That's a roundabout way of saying, here we go. So I moved to New York after college in order to go to graduate school in art history. Which I did, and then got a second graduate degree in arts management from Columbia. So that propelled me into a career in museums, far away from the art that drew me in and more towards managing institutions. And I bring that up because a large part of managing institutions, particularly art museums in New York, is raising money. And it was a stroke of luck that fascinated me. And really has seeds for my later life. And I mean by that, not just setting up systems for how an organization can raise more money, but working with people, philanthropists, who have big and important ideas that they want to make happen. And how do they do that? And if you can join hands with someone like that and find a pathway for it, it can be an enormously fulfilling life and work. And so that is what happened. Um, and after the museum world, I was invited to be vice president of Bennington College. Again, a revolutionary, somewhat radical college when it was founded. So there was no lack of big ideas there that needed funding and needed people to help implement. Um, and then again, another one, I was asked to come and be senior VP at Kripalu, Center for Yoga and Health here in the Berkshires, something that I never would have foreseen. But the mission was to bring this institution from its early ashram roots to the 21st century. So again, working with people who really want to take a big idea and make it happen. And that was quite fascinating to me, and we were able to accomplish some pretty good things. Um, and it was in the summer of 2002 that I first became acquainted with Kripalu, a very painful and tough summer in my life. And I thought, I need something to give a little juice to this terrible time. And I saw that they were having a week of yoga. And yoga had been a practice of mine for a very long time. So I thought, okay, we can go out onto the edge of this. And I went up and worked with a teacher named Patty Sullivan for a week, and she happened to be married to Edward S.B. Brown, who was the former head of the San Francisco Zen Center, also had been head of Tassajara. And after a few days, Ed sort of tapped me on the shoulder and said he was doing the following week on Zen meditation, and he thought it would be great if I could join them. And I said, that was just terrifying. I've never meditated. I have no idea how to do it. I'll be a miserable failure, and just don't even think about it. And he somehow made it seem like it was going to be the easiest thing in the world, because he's also a very lighthearted and wonderfully funny man. It sounded like I might be able to just at least put my toe in the water. Mm-hmm. And so under his guidance, I did a week of sitting on my first zafu, and had, it just sounds so sort of overblown to say it, but I'll say it anyway because it's true. I did have an aha moment of, oh my goodness, where has this been all my life? Feels totally second nature to me, completely at home. And yet I had this guidance from someone who was very deeply immersed in the world of Zen. And so I left there, and I had decided to take a year off between jobs to sort of throw myself into yoga practice and an exploration of many things. Turns out it turned into a year of exploration of Buddhist practice. So I then took myself to Zen Mountain Monastery to study there a bit. I would come into New York every week to study Tibetan Buddhism with Bob Thurman, who became a good friend. Went to Tassajara on the West Coast, and then finally made my way to Barre, Massachusetts, which now feels very much like second home, in a intro to Theravadan mindfulness practice, a weekend. Again, another aha moment. Oh yes, I've been exploring a lot of things, but kind of they've been on the outside, and this felt like a really coming to center for me. And so that was many, many years ago, and have since done short retreats, long retreats, 2 long fall retreats with Joseph Goldstein, which actually now I'm finding I put into practice in this time of isolation. I really feel as if I'm on retreat. And then after several years, I was encouraged to walk down the road to the Barre Center for Buddhist Studies, which again, I don't know why there was all this self-doubt seeming to crop up in this quick resume, but I thought, oof, that sounds like I'll just be surrounded by scholars and I'll never get it. Well, it's quite the opposite. It was really wonderfully welcoming, and And so I had many, many years of study, both weekend workshops and then 2 years of intensive study with Andy Alinsky, just a master teacher,
Terrific. Yep.
really wonderful, wonderful teacher. And that was, BCBS is where practice and study meet. And that was, of course, I didn't know that's what I was ready for, but yes, everything in my background had said, where do practice and study meet? And so I've had many years loving that place. And eventually it was Andy who invited me onto the board. And then somehow somebody tricked me into being chair of the board. and once again, I was back to managing things. So I guess that is sort of full circle. My time there came to an end 2 years ago. And so now I get to be a student again. And I love that. I'm going back there with no sense of obligation of how many rooms are filled or why isn't that working, that I can really just go be a student again. And that's enormously fulfilling.
Great. Thank you much for that background, which it is that circuitous route. It's not a straight line. It's a full constellation of different areas in your life coming together and contributing in their own ways to how you're living your life now. So thank you so much for that. And the book we're going to be talking about today, Inspiring Forgiveness, is actually the third in a series that you've written. I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the other two books first.
Sure. Well, I think one of the central questions is when you start to write books fairly late in a life or career, what is that motivation? Why do we do that? For me, it wasn't to hear myself think or to hear myself talk on a page, but I think with a sense of this has been a very rich and full life, and what contribution can come out of that. And what was most natural for me was writing about generosity because of my work with philanthropy and people who wanted to give back in this world. And so I had toyed with a number of either projects or something in which I wanted to merge my own experience in Buddhist practice with what is generosity. And I was interested in people who wanted to have a different kind of conversation about it, as not the exchange of money and material goods, but instead, what is it to lead a generous life? That really interests me. And I believe, as with the other two qualities we'll talk about, I think that a life that is whose compass is the Noble Eightfold Path is a naturally generous life. What do we really want to contribute to this world? So those were the ideas I was toying with. I didn't know it was a book. I kind of fooled around with it and this and that, and then the wonderful executive editor at Wisdom, Josh Bartok, and I got into a conversation about it. He said, "Well, put some ideas together," and I sort of did, and it sort of started to take shape into something. And he said, "We have a book here. We'd like to do this." It's remarkable. And this hard-nosed publishing world that somebody says, "Yes, we want you to do that." So we worked very closely on, my idea was an offering, really an offering to readers of believing in the power of inspiration, power of transformation. How can you put ideas on paper that can allow people to have aha moments about the subject of generosity? And I found that the most readily accessible vehicles for me to use were great quotations, beautiful poetry, both contemporary and over the years, and then my own telling of 12 stories of people who really lived incredibly generous lives. And I hope I told those stories in a way that would inspire and not just be accounts of someone's lives. And it still stuns me to think that that all happened, but at any rate, it did. And it was so well received, so generously received by so many people, um, that then Wisdom said, "What else you want to write about?" And the subject of it just seems unrelated, but the subject of courage had always fascinated me. Uh, People who really will go out on a limb and dare and speak truth to power and take great chances when there's much at stake. And what is it like to not just rescue a child from a burning building, but to decide to live a life with courage at the center of it, a courageous life? And so the format of the first book had worked so well, the poetry, stories, and quotations, sort of, I think, beautifully designed. I can say that because I didn't design it. Um, uh, we did again in Inspiring Courage. And that seemed to strike a resonant chord with people. And I meant it to really be able to offer readers uh, in times when they just don't think they have any courage to bring to a very difficult, troubling, frightening situation, to be able to look back on some things that they read in this book and think, oh, well, I could put that into practice, or I remember how he did that. Let me try that. Um, and so um, here we are at number 3.
So, what's the story behind you selecting forgiveness as the topic for the third book?
Yeah. Um, I wish I could see a really direct line from life experience. The direct line is probably from Buddhist study, and people would ask me if I was working on a third, and I'd sort of try and demur and not say anything because it's such a tough subject, and invariably when I'd kind of mutter forgiveness, um, well, forgiveness.
No,
Uh, exactly, exactly. I mean, there was just no resounding applause for this at all. It was like universally, whoa, tough subject, really? Um, and when you're in the midst of birthing something, to have that reaction be always there can either flatten you or can make you think, so there must be something here. Why is this so hard for people? Universally, when people would ask me and I'd say forgiveness, it was not a minute before they started launching into recounting an experience in which someone had done something quite painful or difficult to them. And instead of just recounting the experience, they immediately went to, and I'll never forgive him. I'll never be able to forgive him. And that's such an interesting chain when you think about it. We all tell stories about things that have happened to us, difficult moments, difficult experiences. But then as that is the quick sequitur, um, really made me ponder it a long time as I was getting ready to write this. And I think it is that we are creatures with these big brains and judging minds, and our need to be right and to hang on to how we are so right in the situation, just it's really the worst of clinging, isn't it? We just can't let go of he did this to me and I'll never, instead of saying I'll never forgive him, it's saying I'll never let go. I'll never let go of this, and I'll never let go of being the victim, and I'll never let go of the blame. I'll never let go of the desire for retribution or vengeance. There's a lot packed into that sentence of I'll never forgive. So there's beautiful poetry written on forgiveness, and wonderful, really inspiring quotations. And um, the people who didn't just gulp when I told them what I was working on, but who sent stories to me, or people that I might want to interview, were so generous. And I think the 12 stories that I was able to write in this book, I hope they really do offer moments to a reader who, and we're all faced with these situations all the time, when you're faced with that, you can maybe a year later think, well, it doesn't feel like I want to forgive, but I do remember that one person, that Congressman John Lewis, who lived a life of forgiveness, or how the Dalai Lama brings it into life every day, or a mother who forgives a killer of a child. And their stories of how they got there, that there may be something that can just stick with you long enough so that when you need to call upon it, you can. So it was a tough one, but I hope it's a contribution. It was certainly thorny and difficult and inspiring to work on.
Well, let's talk about forgiveness itself for a little bit. What is meant by that? Because there's so many different aspects to it. Of course, there is the part of letting go, as you've described, that you're no longer punishing yourself for something that someone else did to you. But also some of the responses that you got when you admitted, yes, I'm doing something on forgiveness, and how people responded to that, that forgiveness is a complex topic. And it may not be the right time to forgive. So I'm wondering if you might explore that a bit, because quite often I hear about forgiveness it's not about giving abusers, for example, a hall pass on that behavior. So I want us to look at some of the heart of this as well. It's not just, everything's fine and I say some words and all is great. Forgiveness is complicated and difficult. So let's talk a little bit about that too.
Yeah, I think so many people feel that if they just wait for the right moment, it'll come to them in a flash and they'll be able to say, okay, I forgive. Equating it with forgetting, wiping the slate clean. It would feel good to not carry this around, therefore I'll just set it down. You can't really will it into existence. I think you can create the conditions for it to arise and to flourish. But you can't just really say, I'm going to forgive, and have it have the vibrancy that it should if you're going to take on an act like that. Yeah, certainly. I think, when you write a book on a subject like this, it can almost imply to a reader or someone who's thinking about reading it that I'm thinking or wanting to say that forgiveness is all good all the time. It can be a very slow process. It's not something that is always in the right moment. Sometimes people live for years before they're able to come to some kind of forgiveness. Sometimes not at all. But I think that, in practice, we do pay a lot of attention to our simple intentions. And the intention to develop a more forgiving heart, or the intention to stand in the light of forgiveness when we look at a situation or a person who has harmed us. To just, these all sound like very broad, nebulous phrases, but I mean them quite specifically, to kind of reset our compass in the direction of forgiveness. May not be today or this year or 5 years from now, but an awareness of the space that we can put around harm that has been done in order for something new to arise from that. And it's a way that we lift each other up when we're able to do that. It can be a very, when it's genuine, a very positive move. We also have to say that just like sort of fake generosity or fake courage, there can be a very condescending forgiveness, a kind of a looking down, oh, I forgive you, dismissive, not real at all. So that's obviously not what I'm driving at.
I think that's one of the challenges you mentioned, how to authentically forgive. And what is the value for the person who has been receiving of harm to forgive someone else who may be genuinely regretful about something they did not intend to do? I find it's a little easier to forgive under those circumstances. There wasn't an intention to cause harm. It may be that there was an intention to cause harm. You see this in racism or bigotry, for example, or hate crimes where there is an intention, and it can be very difficult to forgive, though. So the question is, why would I forgive that? And I have been
Yeah.
harmed. Why? If I'm okay with, yeah, this is not something I'm going to forget, and my not forgiving is not harming me at all, why would I do this?
Well, and I think we also have to remember that if, in the case of being abused or something really terrible having happened to us at the hands of another person, we have to use wise action, and wise action is getting out of the way, perhaps removing that person from our lives, at least for now. Saying this just can't be part of how I'm going to live. I'm gonna think about this one over time, uh, and not beating ourselves up for not being able to forgive in this moment. Good Lord, there are plenty of times in which great anger and sadness for someone's actions are completely called for. Um, but I think in so many cases it is possible to bring a kind of compassion in regarding a person who has done something dreadful. Quite often, not always, that person is acting out of their own pain, their own background, perhaps as an unloved or abused child. I'm thinking of people in the news right now that we're all very angry at. Um, uh, to try and imagine them as a 2 or 3 year old who isn't receiving love and affection and compassion that they need. It doesn't mean that you change your opinion of anyone, but I think you change your heart in realizing what people have to go through. And I think too, in for Buddhists, metta practice is uh, a great opener to forgiveness. It's really, if we can, for so many, the bringing an enemy into metta practice, wishing well. As we do that over and over and over, it picks up speed and strength. I think in our ability um, to send loving wishes. Um,
Thank you for that. And it's a complex topic. And you said earlier, and I agree, is that forgiveness is not forgetting, that it might not be the time to even try forgiveness for you. And being aware of that so that forgiveness is not used as a bat to further
yeah,
traumatize a victim. That's not intent. That's quite the opposite of what an intention behind forgiveness would be, enlightening one's heart of burdens that might otherwise not have to be carried. So thank you for that. And I'm wondering if there's anything else you'd like to share with the listeners about forgiveness or anything else that you happen to have in mind.
well, I think in this particular time, you and I are speaking in, I don't know what stage it is of this global pandemic, in which um, I think that no matter how it is showing up in our lives, we are all facing our own mortality to one degree or another. Uh, and I was struck in doing the research for the book and in the interview in the book with Koshin Paley Ellison, a very old friend, and his partner, husband, Chodo, their work with people in the very end stage of their lives and how universally the subject of forgiveness comes up. Either they want to be forgiven for something that they've done in their lives, or they want to ask for forgiveness. But when when you're right up against it and you know time is short, forgiveness becomes a very, very big topic. And I think I feel that now in this time where we're not necessarily, if we're lucky, up against it, but we're contemplating being up against it. What is that like as we lose people every week? I lost 2 friends this week. We can't help but think, what do I want to set right? Who do I want to be in touch with that I've meant to be in touch with? To not necessarily offer forgiveness or ask for forgiveness, but I think that weaves itself into the conversation. People that we may have just simply abandoned for a while, bring them back. But forgiveness seems to be, and I don't think this is just because I just had a book come out on the subject. I think it does seem something on people's minds a lot. So I hope that's true. I hope this is helpful. And I also should say on the Inspiring Courage book, there's been a real resurgence of interest in that book during this particular time, as people search for ways to face the tough days with greater courage. And so Wonderful Wisdom Publications has just put in an offer of that book at half price between now and the end of May for anyone who orders it through Wisdom, through their website. So I think that was wonderfully generous of them, and it seems to be helpful, which is the point of the whole thing.
Thank you so much. So for those who are interested in finding out more, I'll have a few links on the episode page for this episode, along with links to the books we've mentioned here. Our guest today, Barbara Bonner. Barbara, thank you so much for being here. Really nice speaking with you today.
A great pleasure. Thank you, Ted. And thank you for your work.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to learn more about something you've heard in today's podcast, please come visit the SBA website at secularbuddhism.org, and you'll find an entire webpage devoted to this and every episode. Discussion about this episode can be found on the episode page itself, along with show notes. The music for The Secular Buddhist is used by permission from John Kaizan Neptune's CD, Steps in Time. Additional music is provided courtesy of Monty Levinson of Taihei Shakuhachi and Rodrigo Rodriguez. Their websites are linked on the SBA site on the About Podcast Music page. Until next time, remember, every moment you have a choice. Make it the best you can. See you next time on The Secular Buddhist.